Okay, students, so I came up with a somewhat simpler demonstration of inheritance that applies to the task 1 assignment. The only thing that I've changed here is that instead of making a more real-world type of demonstration here, I've just created a framework to show you what's going on as a result. I set off making in the system a string and a method, which is what we call whenever we want to do something. And in our string is just something that says starter string. It indicates that this is in our project. If we were to start a brand new project, whatever we called that. And in this case, I have named that project starter. Okay, the program within there, I've called it starter. It comes up normally as form 1. I renamed it to starter. So I named it starter. You can see here starter inherits from form, but also we have the constructor here, which calls initialize component. And if I had a I have a form, but it's a blank form at this moment. And in this example, I'm not even going to bother with creating anything on the form because this is just simply going to complicate the demonstration. So I have a string and something that says that this particular string is in starter so that it makes it easier to see later on. I also created a method, and it has a message box show that says I am in starter so that we know that something has executed that as well. In starter load, I have placed the item which essentially will kick off every other thing. Last derived is a class, and that class will call everything else, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Now, I created a class called derived1, and it inherits from starter. Okay, so starter inherits from form, derived1 inherits from starter, and the only thing that's in this is a string that derives from basically just a string, and it says it's derived 1, okay, and it has a message box in it in a derived 1 method, okay. So each one of these is going to have something that looks just like this. It's got a string, and it's going to have a method, and that method is going to have a message box in it. So there's one here. There's another class here called derived2, which is inheriting everything from derived 1. Okay, and then finally I created a class called last derived. Last derived inherits from derived 2. Now remember, derived 2 inherits from derived 1, derived 1 inherits from starter. So as a result, last derived can access every single thing from all of those other classes. Okay, so you can see here that if I do this method, last derived method, this is just to do everything and to show that everything works. So if I do messagebox.show, this is the string derived, to messagebox show string derived 1. message box show string derived starter, or string starter rather. Okay, and then derive2 method runs, and it does the message box in derive2. Derived1 method does the message box in derived1, and then starter method does the method in starter. Okay, so all of this is in the last class, and again, last derived inherits from derive2, derive2 inherits from derive1, derive1 inherits from starter. So when I run the program, the first thing that it does is, after the constructor, is to issue a thing which says, run the code for the form first to bring up everything in the form. There's nothing actually on the form, so I create the class, instantiate the class last derived, and then call last derived dot last derived method, okay, which executes everything in here. And this works because of the fact that when you inherit from the previous classes, okay, it pulls in everything in here, and because this class inherits from this class, it pulls in everything from there, and because this one inherits from starter, it pulls in everything from here. Okay, so this kind of is a little bit of a circle kind of demonstration, but in normal cases it wouldn't be. But when we run this, you can see it says delivered to string is stored in this variable, delivered1 string is stored in this variable, starter string is stored in this variable. All of those were the strings in each particular task. And then I am in derive2. That's the message box that runs in derive2. I am in derived1. That's the message box method from derived1. And I am in starter. That's the starter method that is running. You can see I am in starter. Okay, so each of those were inherited, and as such, it's kind of like, let's say that you have some box, okay, and it's a kind of a smallish box, and then you take that smallish box and you put it into a medium-sized box. So the medium-sized box is inheriting the little box, and that would mean inheriting everything that's in the little box. And then the medium box, you stick that medium box in a big box, and the big box then inherits not only the medium-sized box, but since the medium box inherits everything that's in the little box, the big box then inherits all of the boxes. Okay, so so anything that is public to the outside box can be derived into the next item. Okay, so this is a relatively simple example, and it is, as I said, each one of these is fairly similar. So this is derived 1, this is derived 2, this is last derived, and mainly this is so that at some point you show that the biggest of the boxes, if you will, can see everything in the other boxes. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, so I'm doing one more video, and that video is going to show you things that relate to task one, relate to task 2. This one relates to task 1 and is really just a basic thing that shows how it would lay out. Okay, so I'll see you in the Inheritance 4 video for task 2.